Hello, we're rolling into the first episode of the DRH show 2020. Of course, in each episode, I'll be talking with interesting people within the fields of psychology, mental health, and well being. Our brilliant guest this week is a counselor and a psychotherapist, Olivia Djouadi. It's lovely to have you here. I hope I got your name right.
Yeah, that was right.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure for me to come and be able to talk with you today.
Thank you. Now, just to start off with, could you please tell us who you are, where you're from, give us an abridged version of yourself, essentially how you became a psychotherapist and a counselor?
Yeah. I'm Olivia Djouadi and I'm a UKCP psychotherapist. I'm also a tutor and supervisor as well, and I teach online supervision and counselling. I'm also a online psychotherapist, which is now full-time online. And my background is it's quite a diverse background. I lived in the UK until I was 11. Then I moved to America between the ages of 11 and 24, and then I moved back home to England at 24. So I had sort of half my life in England and half in America, which was quite different, even though we speak the same language.
Yeah, so you have an Anglo-American experience.
Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned about your role as a psychotherapist, so your background is like a psychotherapist and as a counselor. Now, I just want to establish the differences between these roles, because obviously in the field of psychology and mental health there are different helping professions. What could you please help us identify the differences between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and a counselor? And sometimes there are also people whom we call a coach. So could you help us to identify these differences?
They are different roles, but at the same time there are similarities there as well. I think I'll start with psychiatrist because that is quite different from a psychotherapist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor and they have the ability to prescribe medication, but they can also assess clients if they have any other health issues, so they can balance what drugs are needed with the different conditions they may have, because it's found that with people that have gone through a lot of trauma, they tend to have more illnesses as adults, so it gets to be quite a complicated job trying to juggle everything. With psychologists, they are also trained to care for patients or clients, but they do assessment and diagnosis, and then some mental health support, and they can also refer on clients if they need certain needs. You know, like if they've got an eating disorder, they will refer them over to an eating disorder psychologist or clinician.
But they don't prescribe medication.
No. But they do seem to work more closely with psychiatrists than, say, counsellors or psychotherapists would. So with psychotherapists and counsellors, although there used to be more of them in the NHS, the numbers have dropped only because of the changes in the mental health funding. So a lot more of the psychotherapists and counsellors are now working in private practice. And with counsellors, they tend to work on the symptoms as well as the condition. And with psychotherapists, they tend to work more long term. But the thing is that they are very close to each other. So for instance, when I trained to be a psychotherapist, my degree was actually in counselling and psychotherapy. So you know, if a client is asking, I might say, well, they're very similar, but then there are small differences. However, if you've got a counsellor who's been a counsellor for 20 years, I would probably feel that they are more knowledgeable than a psychotherapist in their first week.
Yeah.
So I think that both roles have merged a bit together. And just like psychotherapists who may be part of the UKCP or the BACP or even the NCS now, counsellors are also unaccredited by the same bodies. But you don't actually have to be accredited to be a counsellor or psychotherapist. But if you do want to work in the NHS or in certain roles, then you do need to have some accreditation.
And what about those people who identify their roles as coaches, say for instance like wellness coach or a speech coach? Would that fall within the same remit?
No, not really. I think that for coaching there is different goals involved. It seems to be more goal orientated and encouraging.
I see.
I mean, so are the other roles, but there's also a different amount of training. Some training might be a year, some might be 2 years, but there's also coaching training that can be a couple of months. But what is concerning is sometimes there is now training for coaches to be trauma coaches.
Yeah.
And yet they've only had 1 year of training. And that worries me.
Yeah.
As someone who works in trauma, I'm like, oh, you need more training.
Yeah, so I suppose what you're saying is that if you're trying to seek professional mental health, you should really be familiar with the differences with this and then just look for a person which is more suitable for your situation. Now, you mentioned that you're delivering your session of psychotherapy through online. Could you please tell us more about that and how exactly are you doing that? And is that different from, a traditional way of delivering psychotherapy?
Yes, I think I'll say a little bit about why I got trained in online psychotherapy. What had happened was in the last year of my training to be a psychotherapist and counsellor, I had a mini stroke, and so my health was challenged. My brain seemed to be, intellectually I seemed to be fine. However, I was a bit slow and it took a lot of time to kind of get around. So I realised that I couldn't be racing to clinics all over the place. And I happened to stumble on training for online counselling and psychotherapy. So I thought, oh, this is amazing, this could really help people who can't get out of the house. So while I was finishing off my postgraduate degree, I then did a diploma in counselling and then went on to do one in counselling and supervision online. And it has really been helpful because not only does it mean that people with disabilities or other chronic conditions can access psychotherapy online, they can do it at home, which means that they're not having to struggle with the travel or because sometimes they may miss appointments because they just can't, they just don't have enough energy to make it there. But in a way their energy will be taken up in an online session by going to make a cup of tea before session. So it's not so much of struggling to get to places.
Now you mentioned that you mentioned about the benefits of doing it. It caters to people who are less able to travel. But I suppose there are also disadvantages. What would you say are the disadvantages of delivering session online?
There are certain mental health issues which have to be worked with carefully. If somebody has quite severe psychosis, it can be very difficult to manage online because if there has been a sort of a distance with reality, seeing your therapist on a screen may kind of confuse you even more. And so it's advised that anyone who is suffering from psychosis go and see someone face to face. And but I think that what needs to happen with any kind of online psychotherapy is that the psychotherapist or counsellor is trained in the area that they work with. So for instance, I worked in trauma. I've always worked in trauma, and so I have a lot of knowledge on some of the signs and signals that people may have when they're having a traumatic experience or telling about some trauma, which I can see online. However, if I'd never studied trauma, then I may not be able to pick up the signals that where people are starting to feel distressed online.
Okay, I see.
And so I think it's really important that you have had some face-to-face work and knowledge before you deliver it online. But the other part about working online is that you can, if you specialise in a certain area, so I specialise in severe trauma, so with that I can meet clients the other side of the country or even the world who may be suffering from what I'm trained to deliver. And that's not always the case. I mean, I live near London, so basically there's an awful lot of us clinicians as a whole that people can see.
Yeah.
But in really rural areas, there might only be 3 therapists, and they're not all going to be trained in everything.
And are the clients that you see, are they based here in the UK, or you mentioned that you can of course meet everyone online, but which countries usually your clients come from?
Well, I see a number of expats and people that are working in war zones.
Yeah, because presumably that's got something to do with the area that you work on, about trauma and chronic conditions.
Yeah, and so I do see people in Asia and Africa. I have seen people also in New Zealand as well. So basically I can work in many places, and because of the area that I specialise in, it means that I can reach places where therapy may not be very common, because in the middle of war zones people are not usually training to be psychotherapists.
Yes, yeah.
And some countries are not really aware of counselling and therapy, because if a country is in a war and they've been in a war for a long time, I mean, some countries seem to be in and out of wars for almost a decade or more. And so in a way, severe trauma is normal, and so people don't even recognise that they have complex PTSD or conditions like that, because everyone is suffering in various ways. And I've seen this in some of the countries that I've been to where wars have happened, where something innocent will happen. A child will knock something over and it will crash on the floor, and all the adults will go
yeah.
And it's not because the kid, I mean, some of it is because the kid dropped the cup, but a lot of it is because they're all carrying trauma from the war that's going on, but they don't recognise it because they're all doing it at the same time.
I suppose that would be PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what you mentioned about chronic conditions. If you could just expound on that, and you're also working in trauma now. Could you please tell us why is psychotherapy useful for chronic conditions and trauma?
Well, with chronic conditions, I feel that it's an area that really needs emotional support, and I think that...
What would be an example of chronic conditions?
Well, chronic condition would be something like diabetes or asthma or epilepsy. But it can also be some of the mental health diagnoses, because there are certain conditions which are lifelong once they start. And so more support is needed, not only for the person with the condition, but also a family member who may be caring for them full time. And so I will see a mixture of people that have chronic conditions and also ones that are carers. And for me, I really felt it was important that medical health was viewed at from an emotional standpoint, because in 1973 I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. So from the word go, from basically being a baby, I was on insulin injections and blood tests every single day, and have been for my life. And that's stressful.
Yeah, it is.
And you know, I think that some doctors try to be kind by saying things like, oh, you'll get used to it. And you know, I thought, well, you know, people don't get used to slamming their fingers in the door, or you know, if something hurts, it hurts. You learn to tolerate it rather than get used to it. It doesn't disappear, it just sort of, you get more used, you do get used to it, but it's more tolerated than just ignore it. But also with chronic conditions, parents or spouses maybe feel quite anxious, because with certain conditions, if it goes wrong, they could die. So there's instant urgent action that's needed, which is quite stressful on the family.
Now, you mentioned about, you know, like being, if you've got chronic conditions, presumably your perspective in life changes. So, and I hear that word perspective when we're talking about counseling and psychotherapy. A lot of people on that role talk about that. Could you please explain to us what perspective is?
Yeah, when I talk about perspective, I talk about different ways of seeing things. And just because two people are raised in the same place, they can have completely different perspectives. So me and my one of my brothers are very close in age. Same parents, same house we grew up in England, and yet we're completely different. And so his perspective on life is very different from mine. However, we were in the same house with the same parents. So why would it be so different? And it's because of the people that we are. We each come with personalities that are different from each other. So we will have different perspectives on things. We are now in very different careers. However, we both work around trauma in our own career fields. So that's also an interesting thing, and it makes some clinicians think, what's that about?
And I suppose that it's also important that the client's perspective and that of the psychotherapist or counselor matches their perspective, because otherwise there would be a clash of perspective. Or do you think that happens?
I think it happens, but sometimes it's down to some of the training. Because I think that when patients or clients come to see us, they feel that we know everything, and we know as much as we're trained in or we've experienced. And so I hear from some of my psychotherapy clients that they didn't talk about their trauma with the last therapist, and it may have been because of an innocent comment was made. You know, like if somebody tells of something terrible, and sometimes there can be what they call a kind of information dump on the first session, where a lot of kind of trauma is revealed. And if somebody goes, they can make an innocent comment such as, what, in England? Or and no one noticed, or what did the police do? And these are innocent, clumsy comments, which do happen. And I think as clinicians we all make clumsy comments at times. So it's not that, you know, just because I'm trained in a certain way, you know, I don't make clumsy comments. Everyone does. But for somebody who's just told something traumatic, if they're then being questioned if it's real, it's a bit sort of off-putting. Because when trauma has been involved, with certain traumas at least, there has been, with abuse especially, there has been some kind of framework where you don't tell anyone. And so sometimes when you receive a clumsy comment for telling for the first time in your adult years, you then kind of pull back from saying. But then when you meet someone who has worked in trauma and may say something like, I understand and I'm really sorry that happened, do you want to say more? Then it is less frightening and people will reveal more. But I think for me, some of my training not only came from my psychotherapy and counselling experience, but it also came from working in refugee centres, because I must have had a vibe or something, but most of the people that I spoke to came from countries in Asia and Africa who were going through really bad turmoil. And so some had been through prisons, some had been through torture, just horrendous stuff they went through. And because I got a reputation of being able to chat with people that had been through that, they were kind of funneled my way. And for me, there was something very honest and a gut feeling that they were telling the exact truth. And so I didn't question what they were saying. But I did say to them, you know, now you've left your country, you do carry your history with you. So you may still feel a little bit stressed or upset, but by talking, it can really be helpful.
Certainly. Now, you mainly work about trauma based from, that's what I've got, based from, you know, sharing your experiences. Now, based from your years of experience, how common do you think trauma is, and why is it that psychotherapy is, you know, I think the best course of action in dealing with trauma?
Trauma is really common. It's just that it comes under many definitions. So a car accident is a trauma. Being diagnosed with a medical condition is a trauma. And so are traumas that happen within families or in schools where harm has occurred. There's also trauma if you have lived through a war experience, or also for things such as moving. There is something called the...
Moving house, you mean?
Yeah, moving house, yeah. There's something called the ACEs, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, which they have in America. And people will have a higher number if they have moved, had family abuse, bullied in school, neglect, and a range of other harm that can happen during the childhood years. And also things like changing country can also cause a point on the scale as well. And they've now found that people that have high ACE scores are 60% more likely to have an autoimmune condition. And yet when somebody is diagnosed with a medical condition, the doctor is talking about the results of their tests rather than did you have trauma before the age of 10. So there is a little bit of a gap still between medicine and psychology that needs a little bit of joining up. Because actually, if you've got someone with a medical condition who is receiving psychotherapy or counselling, their medical health improves as well. So it helps to improve both the medical and the psychological issues that may be at hand.
I think that's where the idea of, you know, like treating mental health the same as physical health, because just like what you pointed out, often we're focusing on the physical aspect, but we tend to ignore about the mental aspect. Okay. Now, I did a bit of research on the kind of work that you do. And you mentioned that you work in trauma, and another intriguing area, for lack of better term, that you work on is cult. Could you please tell us more about your work in that field?
Yeah, my work with cults, it sort of started, I have a lot of training in dissociation, and I was also trained by Marlene Steinberg, who put together the SCID-D, which is the statistical interview, clinical interview for dissociative disorders. Usually it's psychologists or psychiatrists that may give this assessment, but I happen to be trained in it, and I do give it online. What I was also finding was that some people with dissociation have also lived in cults, and people tend to think of cults as something in America because that's what the films are about, or some of the books, but actually cults exist everywhere. They're usually not called cults. They usually have a group name of some sort, and people may not realise they're even in a cult, but the way cults work is there is a group membership that happens, and then various rules start being added to the group, and then in certain groups harm begins to appear. But the thing is that there can be groups that are run perfectly fine with the same name as another group that isn't. So, for instance, we might call religion one of the groups. And in years past and still today, there's people coming forward about, you know, there was a lot of priests being viewed at because some were really not looking after children well. And then, you know, more recently, football coaches came under the spotlight. So that's football groups. And other groups have also had some questionable dealings as well. But the thing is that just because a group has been spotted as abusing doesn't mean that once those people are out, they're healthy. But they do need a specific type of care after they come out. They need a sort of debriefing just to acclimatise themselves with normal living. And this also happened with the some of the cases of people that were kept captive in some of the places in Europe and a few times here, where people had to adjust to normal life because their mindset was whatever was the group or the person that had them captive. So it's really important that when people are leaving groups where abuse has happened, that they do find a clinician that has a good understanding of some of the situations that they've been through.
So if I understand it right, cult, because from my own notion of cult is that it involves a certain element of, you know, religion. So it doesn't have to be necessarily like that.
No, not always. It can be any sort of group. I think religions tend to be focused on by the media just because it's religion and it's newsworthy. But it can happen in all sorts of groups.
Yes, it can be political, it can be in sports, as you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's like the underlying aspect for us to call it a cult? Is it because it's not as organized as bigger group, or there's an element of promising people that if you stay longer with us, you will have more power and authority? Is that what it is?
There can be different groups within a group. So some people may experience the group as very positive, and they are assisted and helped, and will usually be the spokespeople when other parts of the group are under suspicion. Because they'll say, oh no, we're fine, we're great, and they may actually be doing charitable work all over the country representing the group, not realising that in the same group harm is happening. And in a way this can happen with families as well, where somebody steps forward and say, oh, I was abused in childhood, and the rest of the family like, what are you talking about?
And we're not just talking about physical harm, of course.
No.
There could also be mental and emotional harms.
Yeah.
And just focusing more on this area that you work on, I understand that you were invited at a conference last year about to speak about cult. Could you please tell us more about it? Like, what sorts of people attend on this conference? Are they more academics, or they've got lived experience of being a member of a cult?
Yeah, it was both, which made it really interesting, and I learned so much when I was there. It was the
is it here in the UK?
No, the group is actually based in Florida, I think, but they have quite a large international community, and so they had it's called the International Cultic Studies Association, and they had a conference in London last year, not in London, in Manchester, I think. And I was invited to speak, and I spoke on captivity, and in a way, if you are held captive by one person, that's a micro cult.
Okay.
So that's why I was able to speak there. But I also heard about lots of different cults in the UK, and also members who had left these cults and the horrendous experiences that they've been through. I mean, there were some cases where people were born into cults, and the only reason they were born and unregistered was so they could be used for sexual abuse. And for some clinicians, that's like, do you mean in England? It just seems so extreme that it's hard to believe. But the other side of hearing such traumatic experiences that people may be saying is that you need to look after yourself as a clinician as well, because there's something called vicarious trauma that can occur where you are being overwhelmed by details shared, and you might be a brand new clinician, and you happen to get a client who's gone through severe abuse, and it is kind of, how do I deal with this?
Yes, it's just too overwhelming to receive those narratives. You have a very interesting range of work. You work in chronic conditions, you work in trauma, and I've never heard of people who focus working on cult. But if there's one important thing that you'd like the public to realize about what's important about your work, what would it be?
That trauma can happen to anybody, and it is okay to get support if it's needed, and also if you are going to seek private counselling or psychotherapy, or even a private psychologist, it's okay to check them out. Look over their website, see what they've studied, because for some people they may need an addictions counsellor, where other people may need a trauma counsellor, and we will be trained in different areas. So, and that will really help you progress in life.
Yeah, it's important you mentioned that you really have to look for the qualifications and the experience, and to see if it's like a dating game basically, just looking for the right partner for your mental health journey. So you've done online session, and you're also speaking at conferences. What are your other plans?
Well, I have been working on a book at the moment. That's been a bit of a long process.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I am doing more of now is I do the dissociation SCID assessments now online. And these are really long assessments if somebody does want to get a more thorough diagnosis for dissociation. But it can be done online, and I did check it out that it is okay to do that online. So that's another area that I work with.
Will you also mention that on your upcoming book?
Yeah.
Okay. And when do we expect to hear about your book?
It's been a bit of a challenge over a couple of years. I think that sometimes life can get really busy, and then writing stops and then starts again. And I think in a way I needed to have more experience in order to write more for the book.
Anyway, well, you'll get there. We'll wait for your book.
I'll get there.
Olivia, it's been an insightful conversation with you. We really learned a lot about chronic conditions and perspectives, and called, but unfortunately our time is up. But it's lovely to have you here, and I look forward to hearing more about your work. Thank you for joining me.
And thanks for having me, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you.